everyone, and welcome. I'm here with Denise S. Robbins, the author of The Unmapping. The Unmapping was the first book that I published with my imprint Mareas. And so we're here today to catch up, to talk a little bit about The Unmapping and the few months since release, and then also talk about the book itself in sort of a discussion. We're going to try and keep it as spoiler-free as possible, so even if you haven't read it yet, you can still enjoy the discussion. But yeah, that's what we're doing here. Hi, Denise. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. I'm good. I have nothing really to say more interesting than I'm good.
How have the months been since release?
Good. I have to say, I was not expecting how much I would be looking forward to things kind of settling down and being back to normal. Was so excited to publish a book. I was like, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to love going on this little book tour and talking about my book. And then I just wanted to just sit at my desk after like a number of weeks and just get back into writing again. So it sounds kind of like, I don't know. We worked so hard on this book and I loved it. I loved the launch. It was great. But I also was just like so happy to be back home and back in my normal routine.
Yeah. So when for the launch, if you guys didn't like see all of the or follow along, we had a launch party. Well, we were at BookNet first in Orlando.
Yep.
Then we had the launch party in New York. Then we had an event in DC. And then I was supposed to be at an event, but I got sick after all the travel. But you had an additional event in Madison.
Yeah.
So you had quite a bouncing around, quite a few events to go to launch. And I was definitely the same way that I got sick. And so my body was like, enough after a little bit. So
yeah.
It's interesting because you have so much lead up. You wrote this whole book, right? And it was like a year's process for you. And then it's like out in the world. And then it's like, okay, bye.
Done. And also in between all of that, I went to Colorado for a friend's wedding and just spent some time out there. So I actually feel like that was the best possible way I could have launched my first book, was by having it sort of take place, shoving all these different crazy life events, like traveling around to see friends, go to a wedding, go to your book convention, go to the launch, reconnect with people in DC. And so it was just so chaotic. I couldn't really put too much stock in, the book release being like this huge, big, scary thing that if it doesn't go well, everything will be terrible. It's like, no, things are just, I didn't have time to think about that. I was just getting from day to day and just trying to enjoy it as much as possible.
And I guess now, the publishing process, I always say this about reading and being a book reviewer and being in the reading community, is that it's like a very solitary activity, but it can be in community. And that's why I like making content and making reviews, because it's that conversation piece of it. And I imagine that being an author is similar. It's a very solitary activity. Obviously, you kind of have a team when you're going through the publishing process, but it's after it's published that people are finally reading your words, and people were asking you about the book and what it meant and why did you do this. How has that experience been in terms of now getting to talk about this thing and then analyze it and see it through different perspectives?
I loved seeing all the different perspectives that people brought to it. I participated in a book club, and I just love seeing how many different reactions people have to the character of Marcus, for one thing, and among other things. But I love that it sort of exists as its own thing now. And I almost like as the writing process was a long journey, and which involved many rewriting, because I went back to it after a few years and I was just like, who is the version of me that wrote this? That's not who I am right now. And now, it's okay that book is already written by somebody who's a different version than me, because I just felt really good about it at the time. I was like, I think this is the best I can possibly put into this right now. And now B, it's something that can kind of exist on its own. And yeah, I love seeing how people respond to it and react to it, even if they don't necessarily like it. It's all very interesting to me. I definitely agree. The community is hard. hard fought. And so when it's there, it's great. I love connecting with people about books, about writing. I have in my desk, like right in front of my keyboard, I have these bracelets. Somebody made one that said the Unmapping on it.
Yeah. I actually in my Discord, somebody joined the Discord recently, um, signed up to be a member and said that they have already read the Unmapping twice and they actually decided to go back to school, like inspired by the Unmapping and like the entire I know. And I was like, what? This is like that's so amazing. It's so, weird and amazing and cool, to have this thing that you worked on that I worked on with you and then it like now being experienced by everybody. So it is quite the adventure.
Yeah, for sure.
We're gonna jump into questions about the unmapping, but I like wanted to pick your brain about this a little bit because we had all of the launch and then now it's been a few months. Are you working on something else? Like what's brewing for you?
Yeah, there's always like a lot of different things brewing at one time for me, I would say, for the past several years. But right now, I think for the past several months, I think I've been in the most relaxed position that I had been in several years because the book is out. It's like, okay, now I don't feel like I need to just keep writing and writing and writing until I get a book published. So I've been a little bit more relaxed about exploring different ideas, trying out a new novel that takes place in outer space, feeling like I actually don't know if I can write this story that takes place in outer space. Like that's really hard. Working on this uh, multiverse thing I was working on a while ago and kind of putting that away and working on some short stories that I feel good about, writing some essays, some reviews. And then most recently, I wrote a novella collection and everyone was just like, you just can't publish a novella collection. You got to turn these into novels. And finally, I looked at one of those novellas and I was like, you know what? I am ready to turn this into a novel. So I'm actually really excited about that. It's the one about, it's about science and kind of mysticism and people trying to bring woolly mammoths back. And some like dark academia and romance. And so I'm really excited about that one.
That sounds great. And I like really like the idea of like, just kind of like messing around with different things until something sticks and having kind of the pressure off in order to do that because your debut is debuted and that's kind of done. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Great. We can talk a little bit about the book itself, which is my favorite thing to do. I think it was really cool to see like through some of those launch events to hear your perspective. And I think it is a very cool perspective of like, I don't know, I feel like I heard you say a couple of times to people like, well, I love that you got that from this book. Like, because I think for a lot of people, they often want to know, like, what did you mean? And did you mean to put that in on purpose? And I think that your approach has always been like, I don't know, the story is the story and the reader's interpretation is the reader's interpretation. But now we do get to pick your brain a little bit on, on the book. The Unmapping has a cast of characters and they're kind of weaving in and out of the story. Our main character is Esme, and we have a couple of questions about like her contrast between other characters in the story. You mentioned Marcus. One of the first things that my community was like interested in when we were previewing the Unmapping, everybody hated Marcus, and they were like, "What happens? What is that relationship?" And we get to see a few relationships throughout the book. So, do you think that the relatively healthy relationship between Darla, the blonde woman, and Rick is a version of what Esme and Marcus could have had?
I absolutely do. And I also think, each relationship is kind of its own thing. But yes, so we have Esme who's in a relationship with her fiance. Her fiance works at this conspiracy minded or one that is a little bit more lenient towards conspiracies blog. And he has his own thing that he's working on there and he's kind of leaving her behind and she's sort of recognizing that and trying to hang on to him as best as she can. Meanwhile, yeah, we do meet some other characters, somebody else who works at this news website, and his uh, whatever the female version of beau is, his amour, his paramour. and and they definitely I think I really liked just having a bunch of different characters sort of reflected and refracted in each other. So what would your life be like if it was slightly different, or if you made slightly different decisions? And I think that's a lot of what the unmapping is trying to do, is literally shake things up so that you can then see your life like from scratch, and all the things that could be or could have been or might still be. So I did like re- having different versions of relationships and characters, and having them sort of talk to each other while still work being their own things.
I think also that like one of the things that I really loved about the story was like this idea, because we do have Marcus, and then we do have Darla, and then we do also have like the prepper's wife, and we have Esme's father and his significant other. So there's like a number of relationships that we are seeing, as you mentioned. And
Mhm.
I loved this idea that like even in the midst of like chaos and they're navigating this like huge event, there is also this focus on like the interpersonal and the relationships and like that kind of chaos, and how would a like large scale chaos affect those relationships. And that feeling of being lost is like sort of mirrored also throughout a lot of these different connections. So what it does it mean to be lost in a place and in a relationship? What does it mean to be like alone in a place and also in a relationship? And so we kind of see them along all of those different lines.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, Similarly, how similar or dissimilar do you think the main character? I don't know why right now I can't as I keep wanting to like say it wrong. Esme is to the prepper's wife, to the wife Rosemary.
Yeah. So, I don't know. It's hard to, I don't want to give spoilers. Should we skip this one?
Okay.
We'll have to find out. And now, if anybody has any questions, I will email. I love getting emails. I will say, I'm not trying to dodge questions, but I do feel like I don't want to give too much away.
So we kind of like mentioned this before too, like about the lost and the missing, and it kind of seems like every character in the book is looking for something or for someone. So we have Esme looking for Marcus, and then we have Arjun who is searching for recognition and purpose. I want to pause here because I love that little muffin so much. I know that he is like a very polarizing character to some people, but I love him so much, and all he wants to do is like be useful, and he's like searching for, I don't know, purpose in a way as well. We have Franz who's looking for meaning. So how were you thinking about this, like, specifically when you were building out the story, that the characters sort of form themselves around this? How does that like motif of being missing play out in the story? And does anybody really find what they're looking for in the end,
Yeah.
without spoilers?
I'm really attracted to the idea of chaos creating internal transformation.
Mm,
I also wanted to write a story about chaos. I have said often that this is a story as a sort of allegory for climate change, but at the end of the day, it's only individuals. I am only one person who can live in this world where the climate is changing and where I'm trying to do something about it. And I have my own internal ups and downs and things that are happening. And, chaos doesn't always lead to personal transformation. Um, when COVID swept the world, probably a lot of people just like went inside and, I don't know, watched Netflix for 2-3 years, and then they were like, okay, nothing is different now. But some people really took the opportunity to reconsider their lives and ask questions about like what's important and what matters. And those are the characters I was more concerned with following, of those people who are forced to ask those questions. And a lot of people, there's like people who are sometimes forced to ask those questions, like a lot of people's lives were totally thrown around with COVID. But some of them weren't, and some people, just kind of like skated through it, and nothing really changed. So I don't want there to have to be some sort of crazy external chaotic event to like help people find themselves or whatever. I hope, that people can ask those questions about their lives sort of all the time. I'm always, asking myself, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Is this the right track? And I feel like I am in a much better place because of it. But there was definitely a time where I wasn't, and things, whenever things started to go really wrong, it's because of that. So yeah, that's why I was really thinking about the chaos internal transformation connection.
You mentioned like this as in conversation with climate change, and I think that like we kind of like when we were talking about the book and pitching the book, I tried to like weave that in, but I didn't also want to give people the wrong idea about like what kind of story this is, because it's like metaphorical climate change that is kind of so how did that happen? What was that incorporation like? And I think you've talked before about like climate change as chaos and like how those two ideas kind of interplay.
Yeah, basically, for me, climate change is about the unpredictable becoming more predictable, or like the unlikely becoming more likely. And so I wanted to take that feeling and bring it to its extreme. Actually, I take that back. That's not what I wanted when I set out to write it. I just had the idea of somebody getting lost where they lived, and the cities rearranging. And I actually didn't want it to be about climate change. I was like working in climate change, and I was just like, this is my escape from that. This is my crazy, weird little story. It has nothing to do with climate change. And then I was like, oh, it absolutely is about climate change, and that helped guide the structure of what was happening. So and it makes sense that like my life was totally surrounded by working in climate advocacy, and so that would come through even if I didn't want it to, or mean it to.
Yeah. And I mean, you kind of in your mind, right? You separately had this idea about cities rearranging, which is a story about chaos. And so like maybe that like connection wasn't there for you when you were like, building out the story because you're looking at the story and then pulling back, you're like, oh, a story about chaos is,
Yeah.
it's kind of a story about climate change.
Yeah, sort of unavoidable.
I don't want to give away the end, but like this because it is kind of like about climate change in this sort of like metaphorical larger sense. The unmapping is like this thing that happens that all of the characters are dealing with, but it's not like the story is not very concerned with like sort of solving what the unmapping is or telling you the truth of the unmapping. But is there like a theory that as the author is right, or like how much of like have you thought that out in terms of what the unmapping is?
Oh yeah, I know.
So someone emailed you and said, "Hey, what's the unmapping?" Would you respond?
I totally would, yeah. I want them to give me their guess first, though.
Okay. So guess what theory of the unmapping is right?
Yeah, and I'll say if you're right or wrong.
Would you ever write more about like the unmapping, or like I don't know, you've kind of created this, world or whatnot. Are there more stories here?
I don't know. I feel like I could probably, if I had to.
No, you don't have to.
It definitely feels very complete to me as is.
Mhm.
And it's hard to imagine. Yeah, it's hard to kind of imagine what will come next. But I have thought about it just vaguely. Like I do like the characters a lot, and I also feel like there's something in the final scene that hints at maybe something else about to come around the corner, but I don't know.
Amy said she's going to email you later. If
Yeah.
anybody's here who's read the Unmapping, I'm very curious about what you think about the end, how you felt about like the fact that like there's not really one single cause that's provided by the book, and you know what did you how did you feel about that kind of going into the end? Because I think it's really interesting. I love like an open ending, and I think it worked for me here, especially because it still felt pretty hopeful to me. Like there was a lot of things going wrong in the story, and a lot of ways that these characters' lives are being upturned. But I do think that it was a hopeful book overall to me. I got ahead of myself in my little question list. Do you think the ending is hopeful or ambiguous or dystopian or something else? How do you kind of interpret it?
I definitely interpret it as hopeful. That's sort of my MO. I can't really live any other way. If I'm not going to end my book hopeful, then like, what am I doing? You know, if I'm writing it, you know,
Mhm.
I can make it what I want, and I want to do it this way. So even if things are still really hard on a physical level, we've followed all these characters on these transformations, and I think they are better situated to live in a chaotic world. And that's really the best that any of us can do, is become more situated ourselves to exist in the chaotic world.
So Caitlin says that it was more interesting in the end than she thought. I know I see that she like exists a little. We don't get a final answer about the unmapping, but we know where pretty much every human ends up. So I guess yes, you don't really get an answer about like what the unmapping is, but you do kind of follow the characters through to the end, which is its own kind of satisfaction.
Yeah.
Uh, Going off script here a little bit. Who's your favorite character? Do you have one?
Argent, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I love them all equally. They're all my darlings, and also I love writing Argent. It was just so fun. I mean, Esme is like such so serious, and so writing her sections were so serious. And
Mhm.
I just always was so happy when I got to move over to Argent and just like have a ton of fun with it.
Is there like a side character that was also like fun too, right? Because there's so many kind of cutting in and out.
There are, yeah. I don't know. I think what I really liked about the side characters was on the revision, getting to expand them out more. You know, in initial drafts, I had many more side characters, and most of them didn't come back. I guess mini spoiler. You know, some of the side characters do weave together. They are repeated, and so I really enjoyed spending time with them. I think I actually liked the coffee boy, the first
Mm.
side character we get in chapter one. This kid who's working in the coffee shop and I don't know. He was also just fun to write. I like inhabiting minds that feel very open and free, and that's how that felt.
Uh,
You?
we have another vote for Arjun. I also it really is Arjun for me. I know that it like he can be a kind of a polarizing character because he is kind of like a tryhard in some ways, or he's just like so earnestly himself. And both I think Esme and Arjun are both like they're young and they're making like messy decisions.
Yeah.
And I think that you do a really good job of like putting you in the middle of that in a way that you kind of cringe and you go, oh no, don't do that, and things like that. But I love his like heart and the way that he was like, I don't know, approaching everything. He just is such a little cinnamon roll boy. I love him so much.
Oh my gosh, you bought him a muffin, a cinnamon roll. I'm like, you're going to eat him.
I am. Great. Another question for you that I have is not, if you guys are interested, we have like a whole like reading guide for the unmapping. We created it for like reading, how do you call them?
Book clubs?
Book clubs. I was like buddy reading groups, book clubs. But if you're interested in getting a copy, happy to share with anybody who wants one. But this is a side question for you. Have you read back or listened to the unmapping since launch or not?
No. I've heard such good things about the Julia Whalen audiobook, and
you can't do it.
I just can't. I think I read a couple of parts for the launch events, read them aloud, and so I did have to reacquaint myself with them. I tried to read different things at each event too, so that was kind of nice, and I was very pleased that I didn't cringe at. I was like, sometimes you look back at your old writing, and you're just like, God, why? But I felt happy with that, and I was like, okay, that's enough.
Yes. I can imagine like being that, like that, having that approach to writing myself, because with my own content, with my content creation, like I make it and I post it and I might watch it back like the first time, whatever, make sure it's okay. And then I never want to see it again. And it actually is like kind of like when I see old things, I'm like, I don't want to see this, because I mean, the best feeling is that if you look at something that you've made and you're like, I could do better, or I've grown, or like you said, who is that person who made it? Like that's, I think, the way that it should be. And when you're making stuff is you're like continuously growing, but it makes it like really hard to go back and like consume and watch that stuff.
Yeah.
The audiobook is really good though, so if you ever get there. Anything else? Are there any other things about the unmapping that you would like to discuss or share about or ask the audience?
I don't know. That's a good question. I feel like there are some other really good questions in that book club guide. I also feel like I should maybe say now that we're doing a giveaway with 6 books. I posted about it on Instagram, and if you do the normal giveaway things, you'll enter, and we'll send you a book. I'll sign it. I'll personalize it, and I will even draw something that will probably look terrible, just because I want it to be something that you can't get anywhere else in the world. So check out that Instagram. Let's see. What did you think about the question about geography and disorientation? How did that concept affect your reading experience?
I like loved kind of hearing your inspiration of like being lost in a place that because I just think that's such a like human experience, that it is one of those things that if somebody brings it up, you're like, yeah, that's happened to me, right? You were specifically kind of talk about walking home, like your walk after work. And this is like the scariest thing when it happens to you when you're driving. If you're like route like that, I would get home and go, I remember nothing about that drive. It was just pure like muscle memory at that point. So there are ways that your sort of body takes over when you do something over and over again. And the idea of that, having that interrupted, I think is just like such an awesome jumping off point for a story. I think that I know New York a little bit, but it is I think picking New York was very interesting because everybody knows like some of the larger landmarks of New York. So there was a way of like creating chaos in setting it in New York. And I don't know, the constant of like where I'm here, but I'm not here throughout, I think is just such a good backdrop for the way that the characters are interacting as well, and all of the chaos that they have. Going back to Darla, I think hers is really memorable to me because she like steps out to go on a date and gets lost and doesn't have any way to like kind of get back home. And so you kind of have both of those disorientations of place, of geography, and you have to really kind of confront what would you do if you were completely lost and you had no maps and you had no way to like what happens. So yeah, that's my roundabout answer.
I love, the book used to not be called the Unmapping when I was working on it. I called it Sidewalk N, and that's a lowercase, just letter N, because I have a statistics background, and it's a totally nerd thing. N is basically like the variable X that you use in statistics as a like sample. You know, your sample is N, so it could be anything. Like when you're talking about statistics, like N is what you're talking about. So it's just like, okay, random, statistically random sidewalk N. Kind of sounds like sidewalk ends. My husband, who's also a huge nerd, like really liked the title, but everyone else was like, no, that's too nerdy. Like nobody knows what I mean. But I'm really, and I was like, people are calling it the Unmapping. People are just like saying the Unmapping all over the place. I'm like, okay, that's obviously just what the name of the book is. But I'm also glad that I changed it to that name, just because I like the idea of maps a lot. You know, I've always really been interested in, like, whenever I'm in a new place, getting really getting to know a place, not through maps, but by walking around, you know, by driving and finding out the routes. And it can be really disorienting to compare what you know of where you live to like a picture of a map. You know, where I grew up, I know the neighborhood like the back of my hand, but I honestly feel like if you showed me a map, I couldn't pick it out. So we're all creating these maps that are really just stories and getting from one place to another. And all of the new information that we have is, you know, placed in that context in those stories. And so, yeah, what happens when the map disappears, but not just physically, but like not just the picture of the map, but the actual map, the story around your life that you built up for yourself. What happens when that is thrown away and has to be recreated from scratch?
I think that it's a really interesting sort of concept too, in like a digital age sort of thing. When I started driving, we were printing out MapQuest maps to like figure out, I'm going to a concert and I need to know how to get somewhere, and I would look it up on MapQuest and like print it out, and I would have to follow the instructions as I was driving, and if you missed the turn, it was like the freaking out of like nobody there to be like, hey, redirecting or whatnot. And so now, like, I if I leave my house and I don't have my phone, I immediately start like, well, I need it because I need a map, or I need a way to connect with people in a way that was never true for me growing up. But now we're so dependent on these things. And so, like, I don't know, it's the like layered idea of not having information at the palm of your hand anymore, right? There wasn't a way to like look it up because whatever it's here is not actually where you are. And so it's like that magnified sort of chaos and being cut off as well.
Yeah.
And like that becomes a larger thing in the story as well, like the GPS trackers and the way that people immediately start trying to find solutions for how to navigate the chaos. Which leads into another question that I have. And I mean, it's kind of cheating to be asking you all of these things because why did you decide that the mapping was going to affect like cities as a whole? Like why a city? Why do you think that why did you make it that way?
I initially would talk about it as a pandemic that affected cities. I was saying that before COVID, and then COVID happened, and people were like, you can't write, if you're going to write a pandemic story, like it has to actually be about a pandemic. But anyways, that's how I thought of it. I thought of these cities as the things that are vulnerable to being afflicted. And that's not necessarily because they're like more vulnerable than other places, but the fact that they feel the most like an embodied organism all by itself. There's forms and the structures that we created. They have their own kind of internal logic and spirit. People are formed by it. I'm not alone in like thinking of cities as organisms. I remember watching a fun art house movie many years ago, and it's just showing all these cars driving through the streets and then immediately switching to a picture of blood going through blood vessels. And I thought that probably stuck with me, even though I haven't thought about that until kind of recently. But yeah, so any living organism is vulnerable and it has its growing pains and things that can happen to it. And cities, and also in particular in the context of climate change, are really interesting to me because they're both an important tool in fighting climate change in some ways. You know, there you can live somewhere that's walkable, that's bikeable, that's much more efficient, and in some ways they're also more vulnerable, and they need a lot more to be resilient.
There's something about a city too that just like pairs really well with the ideas of chaos and like sort of entropy and that idea of climate change. There's a way that cities are like chaos held together by like these rules that we all accept, right? This is the way
Yeah.
that things work. This is the way that things operate. Here's how we travel. Here's what. And so when you start breaking those things down, right, it's really interesting to look at that from a city perspective because there are a bunch of chaos being held together by, streets and rules and signs and things like that. So what happens if all of that kind of goes away?
Yeah.
Caitlin says, we used to have spiral bound atlas for my hometown that we would we would use to find friends' houses. Maps and directions have changed so much in 20 years. Yes, we used to have like a little like map in the glove compartment, but if I needed to go somewhere new, I had to print out my directions.
Yep.
We talked a little bit, you talked a little bit about writing in Esme's perspective and how she's so serious. And so how that was different. But she is a very sort of like logical person, right? And so, and at the beginning of the story, she has a lot of faith in like systems and in like the organization that she works for. And then so she has to see all of that kind of break down at the same time that she is confronting other sort of breakdowns in her relationships. So I'm curious about like how she changes throughout the story, how her reaction to both the unmapping and like all of her deeply held beliefs like change. And what was your thinking when you were creating that story?
Yeah, she is sort of a version of what I could have been if things were different. I think, whenever you write your first novel, you're always like make your main character sort of a version of yourself. There, so I have a lot of things that are very different in my life than she does. I've never been in a relationship like the one that she has in with Marcus, but she and I both lost a parent at a young age, and then studied math. And for her, those two things are very connected, because she just needed logic. She found that very comforting in the wake of something that she didn't understand. Like no one could explain why her mom died, and I don't even know if I would have like made that connection to myself. But either way, finding out that I actually don't like math through college was probably the worst thing that's ever happened to me, which is at least in some ways. I mean, it really shook me up. I went through a really, really hard time. I was just like, I started getting panic attacks. I was like losing my hair. I didn't know what I wanted. I thought I might drop out of school. And I had to really look at my life and readdress things and pick something new. And Esme didn't do that. She stayed with math. She moved to stats, even though she didn't really care about it, just because it was the path that she was on, and it was logical and it made sense, and she never had to question that. So yeah, I think eventually with the unmapping, she's forced to finally question things. There are ways in which she is very well adapted to help out. She kind of thrives at work at first. She's like, let's just do one thing after another. Like we can't think about the why. We just have to like keep working on this. But eventually, her fiance is still missing, and she can't fix that, and kind of burns out. And so things do have to come to a head eventually.
Sorry, I just had you like said something and it like clicked something in my brain and then went entirely out. Oh, I was going to ask. Obviously, you've set a lot with this idea of the unmapping, and you've also come from that background about climate change. Have you thought about like your own sort of if your city was unmapped, what would you do? How would you approach it? Have you prepped for the unmapping?
No, dude, I'm such a bad prepper. I always say we can't keep canned soup in the house because we just eat it all. Like it would just not survive. We just like eating soup too much in this house. We have no stores of food. We keep saying we'll get some water someday, but we don't, like some extra spare water. But my mom is very prepared. She has like a bomb shelter. She has all this stuff back there. So I definitely would go hang out with her for a while. Um, and then, I live in Wisconsin. I grew up with farmers and cheesemakers. And so I would probably hit those friends up and say, hey, like maybe let's form a commune or something. I don't know.
We got to pull people in.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that COVID really made me think about, and it came back up for me when I was reading the unmapping and like thinking about, what it says about community. And I think there's something there about like in chaos, the people that you often have to sort of work with are just the people around you. And so it's like sometimes you have to like get along with or work alongside like I don't know, the worst person but he's your neighbor. And so like there's that sense of like just all being in it together. So one of the things that I really think about in terms of like not really prepping, but that I always have front of mind is like make sure I know who my neighbors are in my building and that I would be able to be like, hey, they check on me, I check on them. They would know if they don't see my face for a while, kind of thing. Like that's the kind of thing that I always have at the top of my mind. Do I have food stores or extra water? No. But my neighbor notice if like I'm not around for a while? Yes. And that feels good.
That was good. Yeah.
All right, let's see. Let's see. What else do we got here? Oh, we've talked a little bit about going kind of in and out of the perspectives, and you've talked a little bit about also like how your editing process like was about working within those perspectives, taking some out, expanding some or whatnot. Did you always know like when the story began that you wanted to write in those perspectives, and how did that come about, and why was that kind of important to the story and the overall themes of the story as well?
Yeah. Yeah, I did know that. That was always the goal. And similarly to how I was just like, I'm gonna write about a city where buildings rearrange. I sort of don't know exactly where those decisions come from, but it felt very inherent to the idea because it is a story, like a society-wide story. And maybe also it's kind of a coping mechanism because I'm like, oh, if my main character, people don't like my main character, there are all these other characters. It's not just her story that matters. I can have all these other stories involved too, but yeah, that always felt like an important part, and it was always really fun. I experimented a lot. I wrote a lot of characters that didn't end up in the final version, and just kept the ones that felt like they were most relevant to the story. But I definitely miss the superhero impersonator on Hollywood Boulevard. That was I was pretty excited about.
You should write his story separately.
I should actually.
Okay, let's see what we got here. I think that was pretty much all of it. I did have, gosh, I keep like thinking of things as you're talking. I'm like, okay, don't forget that. And then I forget. Perspectives. Oh, I wanted to ask you, I know that this is like once the story is kind of out in the world, it belongs to its readers, and we talked a little bit about like the interpretations and that being awesome to kind of experience. But I don't know, is there anything that you hope readers take away from the work, or a thing that you hope like stays with them, whether it's about the story or the themes or about climate change or anything along those lines?
Ultimately, I hope people have fun reading it. If people get through the story and are like, that was a good read, I'm happy I read that, I liked the characters, I enjoyed the ride, I would be super happy. I do, this being a story about internal transformation, like I don't think everybody needs to always be like questioning their lives at every step in every moment, but I do think it's important to take that step back and take a look and think about how your day-to-day life fits in with the world at large, and is that what you want to be doing. And I think we would all be both happier and more I don't know, fruitful if we're all asking ourselves those questions, but not like killing ourselves over them either. Like I think it's really important to also just be happy and find the life that works for you. So there it's a difficult balance. And again, this thing, the whole idea of chaos leading to personal transformation, like I don't want everybody to have to go through a really hard time in their lives to figure things out. That being said, suffering is sort of inevitable. So how can you prepare yourself? How can you have those tools? I just said one of the worst things that happened to me was switching my major in college, which is really objectively not true. There have been many worse things that have happened to me, but none of them have jolted my sense of identity so much, I guess. And I think that happening when I was relatively young helped me become more ready for those other challenges, because I just had a better idea of who I was. I knew what it meant to be miserable, and how that things can actually turn out okay.
I love that phrasing. And honestly, we've kind of mentioned this in different ways, but that's what the Unmapping is, a story about like how a change in place, or this like chaos or catastrophe, jolts everyone's sense of themselves. I think especially probably for our two main characters, but for everyone, right? They kind of have to think about themselves in a different context, because physically, they are in different contexts. And I think that that's, the bulk of the story in a nutshell. I do have another question. I thought about this also because we have lucid dreaming comes up in the story. We do have a prepper that we kind of see. We have a cult that comes up, and then Marcus writes for like an organization that like leans on the conspiracy theory. So we have a lot of like, I don't know, fringes of ideas and beliefs. But I do think that you approach all of them like really with a lot of care. You don't get the sense that you're like kind of making fun of anybody, right? You actually give Marcus a lot of credence. He was right in the end about the Unmapping. So like he was the one, he was working for this conspiracy theory place, but in the end, he was following the Unmapping before pretty much anybody was. So like, what was your thinking in including all of these different things like cults and, lucid dreaming and preppers and conspiracy theories, and what was your approach in writing them?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people went kind of crazy in COVID. Like a lot of wild and wacky things happen, and that was, this is objectively much stranger. And I think I couldn't not have people reacting in some crazy ways. And it also can be kind of fun to write about that, and I also, again, I choose who I want to write about, and I only wanted to write about characters that I could understand and care about. And so I'm going to like, I'm gonna find the people who are doing things that I find interesting and fun, And I think that the conspiracy theory idea, you know, when people think of conspiracy theories or people who peddle conspiracy theories, I guess, that is different from how I approached Marcus in this, because Marcus is just questioning everything.
Mm.
He has spent his whole life just wanting to question things. And I think a lot of people, when they post random conspiracy theories they see online, they're not questioning things. They're like, they have found their weird little view of the world, and they see an article that fits into that, and they're just like, great, I'm going to share it. I'm not going to think about it. So there's a bit of a separation there, but yeah. So I don't know. I wanted to write about cults. Why not? You know?
That was actually like a more of an addition, like from the first manuscript that I read. And you're like, oh, I want to go back and like, you know, revise and add things in. And I was like, of course, yeah, go girl. And then I got like the second one and I opened it and it was like a cult.
Well, I mean, it was in there. It just was so like in the back burner, you know? And it just, then they still, like, the ending is pretty similar, and it has to do with the cult in some way. And so yeah, I thought it was sort of coming out of nowhere in earlier versions, because I didn't actually get as much into the cult idea as I should have, and then eventually did. And eventually, you know, when I was rewriting it, I actually wrote a lot. If I was going to write more of this story, I'd probably just like write the same story, but more from the perspective of the cult people. Because I wrote a lot of what was happening there just for my own knowledge. And I knew that I could only fit in so much in the pages of this book, because I didn't want it to like completely overtake the rest of the book. And so picking out what of this kind of larger crazy story to put in there was also a fun challenge.
Yeah, I love I mean, the editing process, I say, as a person who did not have to like write or edit it. But it was just so fun to like see the, you know, right. I think one of the notes that I had given, and I'm sure the editor as well, was about like the beginning and getting a little like more like hookier. And you were like, okay, cool. I remember, I think you even emailed me something like, I wanted to add an explosion. And so I got the next version. It was like an explosion. So just seeing kind of like that whole process was a lot of fun for me. I don't know how much you enjoyed editing.
Oh, I loved it. I think it's my favorite, because you already have basically, like, you've created all of your paints, and now you're just sort of moving them around. Like, the creation stage is exciting in a totally different way, but it feels very much more like I'm grabbing in the dark. And when I already have a book written and I can just go in and edit it, it feels so much more like I'm at home and I'm just playing around and making things better.
Amy wants to know, have you thought about publishing short stories from these other perspectives?
Oh my gosh. I have not. I think we thought about like posting a couple of the ones that were excised as some freebies, but then I was like, oh, but then I'd have to go back and edit that.
I know we did talk about it, because there were a few that I was like, oh, this is so, and there were a few like points of view, but there were also like Arjun, like we followed a little bit of his Twitter, and he was doing like some creative writing, and I was like, this is so fun, we should post them. And you're like, yeah, but then I have to edit them. And I was like, that's so fair.
Yeah.
I love that we keep asking you if you're gonna like do more in the unmapping, and you're like, no, stop. No more, please, no more mapping. Okay, any other questions in chat or anything else, Denise, that you want to add or say?
I don't know. No, yeah, I do love hearing from people that read it, so definitely feel free to reach out if you have thoughts about it. I hope people do consider checking out that book club guide and talking about it, because I just think one thing that's sort of sad about book culture and culture generally these days is there's so much less common ground. I feel like everyone is reading very different things, and except for, you know, like Taylor Swift comes up with an album and everyone's talking about it, but I would love to contribute to having more people kind of talk around similar books and ideas. And if that's my book, like, awesome. But if that's not my book, that's also fine. You know, I think generally I love talking about books with people, and I wish there were more common reference points that we had. And so that's why I think book clubs are great. And if you're not in one, join one, start one, I don't know, and hope that you read the book.
Also, if you're not following Denise, you had your Substack, and you were kind of updating throughout the whole process, but you've been doing even more now, like interviews and book reviews and things like that, which have been super, super interesting. So a plug for your content, but also how has that been in terms of just, getting more into that side of in the book community as well?
Oh gosh, that's been so fun. And I think if there's one big difference between pre-publication of this book and post-publication is I just feel more emboldened, able to do that, to be able to say, I have a point of view worth reading. And it's silly to be like, oh, just because I have a book, now my view matters. But it at least gave me the confidence to want to do more pitching book reviews to outlets, pitching essays, and engaging on Substacks with other writers, reaching out to people at random saying, hey, you want to read my book? And getting some of that in return. So yeah, I've really been enjoying it. I love writing on Substack. I write on my own Substack, just sort of like book review. I don't know, whatever. I just write about whatever. I don't really have very consistent focus there yet. And I've been writing some reviews and interviews and other publications too, and I'll share those in my Substack more so than anything else.
It also seems like there's like a pretty vibrant community of like writers and readers in Madison. Have you, and I think that you were at one point in DC, which has a pretty vibrant like writing community. Is that true? Like, I don't know. I've just look at your social media, and it seems like there's like a good little group of writers that are based in Madison.
There are, yeah. I love DC was great. Also, I met a lot of writers there through various events and groups. But there's almost like too many writers there. I mean, it's nothing compared to New York, but in Madison, all of the writers know each other. Like there's just the right amount where we all can get to know each other pretty quickly. And yeah, I interview authors. So I moved to Madison. I was just like, I'm going to interview local authors. I'm going to like really focus on that. So I got to meet some authors right away. And then they'd be like, oh, we meet up in this place or in that place. And I'm going to be moderating a talk at the book festival the Wisconsin Book Festival in a couple of weeks. So I've really gotten to know a lot of good writers here. I do miss my DC community and the many different outlets they had for literary community there too.
Great. Okay, I think that is the end. Like Denise said, if you have any questions, you can email. If you want the reading guide, we will send it to you. If you want us to show up, at your book club, send us an invite. You never know. We're able to arrange it. So thank you so much for supporting this book so far, whether you've read it or are going to read it. We really appreciate it. And like Denise said, we hope that you will enjoy talking about it. There's so much here that you could pick apart, and so many different characters to kind of experience. So thank you so much, everybody, for your support. Thank you, Denise, for this book. And we will talk to you guys some other time. Bye.
Thank you.